Hi, Adrienne. Welcome to the Corporate Escapee podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. We've been talking about this for a little bit, so I'm glad that we could get you on here. And I think for folks, well, when they hear your story, one, I think it's super interesting what you're working on. And two, I would still call you fairly fresh out of the corporate realm. So earlier on in your journey, so I thought it would be interesting to share with the listeners that are still thinking about their journey to bring somebody in that's, again, it's still really fresh. We'll get into that in a second. But first, why don't you share with the audience what you are working on today? I know you've got a primary and you're working on kind of a passion project as well, and we'll get into those later. But to help set the stage, why don't you share with the audience what you're working on?
Sure, yeah, thank you so much. So when I transitioned out of corporate, I began focusing on fractional work, specifically as a corporate wellness consultant, focusing on women's health. So that's what my main focus is right now. And then I have a side project called the InnovateHer Lab, which is a community for women who are exploring the next steps in their career, who also want to prioritize their health and well-being and not sacrifice one for the other.
Yeah, which is super. It's really important. And again, I love your side project too. I know it's your side project, but I think that eventually is going to become your core thing over time, just based on needs and passions, those types of things. So corporate wellness. So yeah, doing the fractional now, and you're working with mid-size startup. What size companies are you? Well, two things. Tell me on the corporate side who you're working with, your ideal customer, and then who are you working with on your side project?
Sure. So I'm working with small to mid-sized companies, and my ideal customer, that's a really good question. I think any company that cares about their employees and recognizes that we have a huge gap when it comes to women's health, and there's a real need to elevate that within the workplace.
For sure. And your background's a little bit in that. We'll get into that here in a second because I'm going to take you down memory lane. And then what about on the passion side? Who are the folks that you're targeting, or who's targeting you, right? Maybe a better way, because didn't this kind of start with some people reaching out to you?
Yeah, it did actually. Thanks for the reminder. So who am I targeting? I mean, it's really anyone who's looking for community and support, advocacy, encouragement, all the things, because nowadays so many women are transitioning in their careers, whether it's due to layoffs, ageism, becoming a parent and realizing you can't stay in corporate anymore. It's not a good fit. There's just a lot of transitioning happening. So I think anyone who that sparks interest in and wants that community, and also the education and the networking. I mean, we have just incredible women in there already, from across industries who are just powerhouses. And it's a great place to kind of build I know you mentioned in the past, like your internal board of directors to help you navigate your journey.
Yeah, and the complexity, and it is a brave new world. And like I said, we're going to go back to your transition from corporate to solo or escapee. And I just think having that support network is so important. And I've shared on this podcast before, when I left, it was probably 2 years before very many people knew that I left corporate and started my own thing. And in hindsight, I'm like, what an idiot. Why would I not? I don't know if it was a stigma or I just didn't want to tell. I don't know. I can't tell the reason why I didn't do it, but I get it why people are anxious and hungry for community. And just look what we're doing with the escapee community. I think we're close to 900 people in 6 months, right? It's not like we're advertising or any of those things. So I think just having a group of folks to be able to talk things through is so important. So
especially when you are still in corporate and you want to talk about what's out there, and most of your professional network is your colleagues, and you can't really say like, hey, I'm thinking about leaving, or I'm exploring other options. And so this way, finding your community, you're able to have all of those really authentic, transparent conversations without any of the repercussions of jeopardizing your current career as well.
Yeah, and quite honestly, the judgment sometimes, right? So if you're going to do what? You can't sacrifice. That's too risky, or those. Yeah, we'll get into that in a second. So,
Yeah.
All right. So let's go down with you. It's not going to be too far down memory lane, because you were in corporate, and if I remember correctly, early on, you had helped set up a wellness program at Noom. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Noom. and then moved on to a different company. So kind of walk through, right? You're in corporate, everything's going well, but what happened to lead you to the escapee path?
Oh, that's a good question. So I've definitely always had a really present entrepreneurial side that I put on hold when I entered the remote work of health coaching after school. And I transitioned to Noom in the early days. We had a lot of creative freedom there. I absolutely loved it. Excellent company. And they went through some major rounds of layoffs. And unfortunately, I was caught up in that. And then I moved on to a new company, and it was, polar opposite. I had my dream job. I was so excited. It was a real milestone for me, and then it just went downhill fast. It was such a toxic environment, such a hostile environment to work in, and so I chose to leave there, which I never thought I would ever do. You don't think that when you get your dream job, but I chose to leave, and it was a good decision, and it sort of catapulted me into like, okay, what's next? Do you want to look for another job and maybe end up in another organization that's going to look good on paper, but just be a mess behind the scenes? Or do you want to really try to go out on your own and also, have your own voice? Because when you work for a company, you can't always have your own voice or advocate for your own, beliefs and what's important to you. So I had seen you on TikTok, and I was thinking about leaving this job for a long time. And then finally it just, the straw that broke the camel's back. And so I kind of took that leap of faith. I'm still in the air leaping, but
And we all are in one way or another, right? I mean, that's kind
yeah.
of the beauty of it.
But yeah, it's been incredibly rewarding and empowering just to be able to advocate for what's important to me.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of the specifics too. But I mean, you said something there. I think that it wouldn't have resonated with me early on, but having that voice, right? Because in corporate, you can't. Some people do and do it effectively. You can communicate on LinkedIn, social, whatever channel that you prefer. But it's really usually around the corporate, right? Is it helping me get my next job or the next customer? But now, once you are out and free, it takes a while to get comfortable actually talking about what you want to talk about. And yeah, it's free. And like I said, I've shared on this podcast before, when I left, it was purely to replace income. Actually, it was to make more money. I knew I could make more money, but something you figured out early on, to me, it became about the time. It came, about the mission. All the things that I didn't think that were important to me were a lot more important to me than I actually had realized. And so I'm always a little bit envious of folks like you that figure that out pretty quickly, right? Or even folks that left 3 or 4 or 5 years ago when it got to that point. So I just wanted to kind of reemphasize the freedom of voice, and what you do is such an underappreciated part of this.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely.
So all right, so you got to the point you're like, all right, I'm leaving. What was your plan? Did you have one? And again, there's no right or wrong answer to this because I didn't have a plan when I kind of was asked to leave. You left, but others have gone detailed, and some folks have just like, I'll figure it out. So I would love your perspective on this, and then we can kind of talk through it.
Sure. I'm just trying to think back what my plan was. I ended up leaving pretty abruptly, as many of my peers, fellow coworkers did as well there. So did I have a plan? I think in the background, I had been thinking about things for a couple months, but no solid plan. I had some ideas, and I, had become aware of the option of fractional work through finding you. So I thought, okay, here's some support, some guidance, some mentorship, and a community that can help figure this out with me. And that's just been invaluable.
Yeah, and it's people always will talk when I say people, but there's folks, haters or whatever you want to call them, that say, well, it's too risky to go on your own, and corporate's more secure. I'm like, have you been in corporate? Have you tried to find another job? And quite honestly, if you go down this path solo and you don't like it, you can always go back to corporate, right? It's not like you're walking away forever. Did you think, because I had Kate around not too long ago, and she was a self-described risk averse, right? Super ultra conservative when it comes to risk, but yet she had no hesitation when I shouldn't say she had no hesitation when left, but she made the decision to leave without customers, without really a full plan. And, her opinion was if I was going to take on customers while I was still in corporate, then I wouldn't be doing a 100% job with either my job or the thing. So just curious with your mindset, did you know that were you 100% sure I'm never going back to corporate? Or was this, hey, just share? Because again, I think there's people in the audience that would be curious to see where your mind was at.
Yeah, so I definitely at first was not opposed to going back. And I'm still not entirely opposed. I think it just depends on who you land with. That really makes all the difference. So I would say for the most part, I just was like all of a sudden overnight, kind of like, okay, here I am, what's next? And then began the steep learning curve. And, every day I think about the pros and cons of being on your own and being with an organization. And there are pros and cons with both. So it really just depends on the individual. It might depend on your season of life. One of my motivators to stay out of corporate is I have a 2.5-year-old. And as a relatively new mom, I really need more flexibility than I had. And I think what I realized after leaving is that a lot of women are in the same place, right? The way that corporate is set up now was not designed for women. It was designed by men for men when they had wives at home taking care of all the domestic
Everything
things and
else.
childcare. So now you have women entering the workforce, but they're also doing all those other things. And we also have, specific health experiences such as pregnancy, postpartum, all the female specific illnesses or diseases like endometriosis and PCOS and PMDD. And then, of course, women go through perimenopause and menopause. So we're still navigating a system that was designed, not for us. So I think the longer I've been out, the more I've been like, okay, I can actually have work-life balance. I can spend time with my child. I don't need to be extremely stressed out, So I'm not opposed to going back. I'd like to stay out though.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I was talking to somebody just the other day at a networking call, and she was plan is, well, she's solo, but not by choice at the moment, right? That corporation quit on her. And she's definitely loves the idea of the flexibility. She does have one client she's working with, but there's an opportunity at a nonprofit that, she's been a big advocate of. And so they've got a full-time opportunity. So I'm like, well, in that case, they're going to give you the flexibility to continue to work on what you're passionate about on the side, and you have the flexibility to do that. It's a remote position, so you build it, and you're working for a company that you've known and have, admired in the past. So to me, that makes sense. It's when we take that corporate job, we got to put in the 40 to 60 hours for a job we don't like with people we don't like, we may not like, all in return for the paycheck. So I'm with you. I'm not going back because I don't think that role exists for me anymore, and I'm okay with that. But I 100%, a few years ago would have thought, yeah, that makes sense. If I could find that right combination to give me the flexibility, the freedom, but yet still be a company that I believe in. Yeah, I think it's hard to do that with big corporate roles. I think it'd be probably in a smaller or a startup company, but
Yeah, and over time, even the small ones grow and turn into big ones, and there's more bureaucracy. And, I think our careers are so dynamic, as is our well-being and our needs and our life, So again, for a lot of people, transition is happening frequently, and the old way of staying with a company for 30 years is no more, right? So I think there's a lot of people right now just trying to find their way and figure out what's next.
Yeah, I think one of the things I encourage folks to think about, even if you are pursuing going or staying in corporate, still consider yourself, right, the CEO of your company of one. And even if you're in corporate, you've got your company as one customer. It's your corporate client, and you're doing this work, and instead of getting a retainer or something else, you're getting a salary, and you just got to measure all that, the benefits. Are you willing to give everything they need you to give in return for what you're getting? And make a decision that way, where I never thought that way. I don't know if you did when you were, right? The job sounds cool, looks interesting. I could get promoted. I can make more money. Whatever it was the motivator. It wasn't, how does this strategically fit into my, the career plan? So the one thing I want to go back, because you speak with the passion of the the women and the challenges in the workplace. So you can always already tell where you're passionate. But it seems like that's a huge opportunity in the market as well, in the sense that nobody's really addressing it, right? Is that accurate? And the reason I want to go there is 'cause I think a lot of us made obviously different challenges that we see, but there's things that we're passionate about that, you can find those things. So I don't want to go too far without hearing back, how you became passionate about this. Is it just because you experienced it, and then all of a sudden it just gained momentum?
Well, actually, it all began many moons ago. I started sort of a side hustle when I was still in school on the West Coast, and it did really well. And it kind of surprised me. It was just really offering programs and opportunities that I was interested in. So we had women's groups, health education and support groups, and we had acupuncture for women and outdoor outings for women and financial wellness for women. I would collaborate with other professionals who had anything to offer women. And it did well. I still get calls about it to this day, and that was almost 10 years ago. So like I said, I put that on hold when I entered corporate, and have always still had that passion and that interest. But then getting out, I was able to just find that voice again, and run with it. And, it's a little bit tricky because we don't want to sound like we're discriminating against men if we offer employee wellness focused on women. But the thing is, there's so much overlap. A lot of this benefits men as well. And also, if we take a step back, we do need to acknowledge there is a social responsibility there of organizations, of corporate, to make workplaces more accommodating for women. We're focusing a lot on inclusivity these days, but we're not changing a structure that doesn't support women. So, where am I going with this? It'll be interesting to see how things evolve, and hopefully there is more and more prioritization on women's health and employee wellness and in advisory. Time will tell.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, and I've talked offline about this before, but it kind of marries what you were doing in corporate. It may not seem like it, but the wellness program that you had helped create at Noom, and then with the new company, again, it's still kind of centered around that same passion, right, to improve things. And again, in modern corporate, right now, it's just an absolute mess. At some point, I'm guessing it'll hopefully stabilize and people will get back to investing in programs and the well-being of employees. Right now, it seems more tilted towards the profit over the people. But again, some companies can prove me wrong. Please do. I haven't seen it. But again, I think that's what is the other potential escapees are out there thinking about what you're doing in your day job, right? I don't care if it's CRM, it's sales, it's marketing, customer success, whatever it is. There's also on the flip side of things that over your career, you've helped develop people or mentored, right, folks, or help teach trends, whatever it is. There's that kind of that dual skill set that I think we all have that we don't realize that we have. Maybe some do. I didn't, right? This escapee thing came, out of nowhere in the sense of, but this is what I really, really, really like to do, right? Didn't know. So my rambling answer to that, just for other folks to think about, what you're doing in corporate, the type of companies you like to work for, and is there two sides to that, right? Because the beauty of not being in corporate is there's no boxes, right? There's no wrappers on how to do things and where you can make money and spend your time. So maybe talk just a little about that and I know it's still new as you're working through it. So, but how are you now approaching that with, between the corporate and the call it the consumer or the personal side?
Can you be more specific?
Yeah, I mean, I think because you touched on it earlier, thinking about your business and where you want to spend your time and, where the money's going to come from, because we still have to pay bills, those types of things. So as you've got these two pieces that are complementary, right now, how are you thinking about spending the time and where your focus is? And because, again, I think people out there, and what I'm trying to show is we're all thinking through the same things, right?
Yeah.
And how do you go through that process, and maybe kind of just share where you're at right now, knowing, in 6 weeks it could change. but how you're thinking about it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such a good question. I mostly feel like a kid in a candy shop that I get to spend my time and attention on corporate wellness, focusing on women's health and on this side project with the InnovateHer Lab. And I think having this community of mentors and peers to talk things out with has really helped me figure out where I do need to put my focus. Even if it's just like, okay, this month I'm going to focus on XYZ. And then next month, maybe I can shift over back to this thing, or I'm going to dedicate, 3 hours a week towards this project. Everything else is going over here. So right now I'm mostly focusing on the fractional corporate wellness consultant work. And it's really hard not to focus on the InnovateHer Lab because I do love it so much. But this is one of those challenges of getting out of corporate. It's like you're your own boss. So you have to decide how to spend your time and, where your own ROI is coming from. So that's my most recent plan. And yeah, in a couple of weeks, it'll probably shift.
No, but it makes sense. And that it is the other thing too, that if we approach these as, experiments, right? I mean, I'm definitely guilty of chasing too many shiny objects at times. I've gotten much, much better with that and trying to stay focused. But I've also kind of learned that, hey, these are all experiments that we're working on. Right now, like I said, you're focused on the fractional and corporate wellness side of it. And, maybe it becomes an offering for, right, or an agency type of model for those corporates, or really when you start to figure out what they need, what those corporations need and where they're investing their money. But I do like the fact that we can work on the personal side or the side projects. Again, I think I'd love to hear your opinion, because what I'm building this is for, kind of forever, right? Don't want to work forever. Well, I probably will work forever, but doing what I want when I want. And so if I can create this where I can build all that flexibility and still take care of things, it'd be the dream. So,
Absolutely.
So I don't know where my question was going to go with that, but more of just a rat down a rabbit hole of, the opportunity, I guess, more than anything. But
yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, it just reminds me of a conversation we had in the corporate escapee community last week. It was about just like being your authentic self, which can feel uncomfortable when you're used to being like your corporate identity, and that's the hat you wear. But when you're working for yourself, it's like, okay, what is my own identity here? And it got me thinking that, and to your point about doing this forever, I really think that when people are able to be their authentic selves, they're going to bring the most value to the world, and they're also going to be the happiest. So it's like a win-win for everybody. You get to do what you truly love, which is also what you're probably going to be the best at. Of course, it's going to be a learning curve and a continual learning process. But ideally, that's what we all should be shooting for, I think. And now with the world changing, there are these opportunities to create the work that you want instead of trying to fit yourself into a position that may not align with your values, your goals, or your long-term plan. So yeah, it's great that there are these different initiatives happening, these different communities popping up that can help people find their way.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point on being your authentic self, right? Because we are our corporate personality forever. You had to be, right? You had to play the game. You had to play the politics. Some were better than others. That was really never my strong point, right? But, the people that get promoted most of the time were the ones that played that game really well, but it's probably not anybody that you'd want to hang out with or have dinner. That's right, outside of work. And you're right, it's just so much easier to get up every morning knowing you're going to go be yourself and work on, what's important to you versus somebody else. So, and I think the good part is the world of work is we're moving this way, right? Small businesses are starting to adopt with fractional, but I think, other services, right? If they've got problems, people like escapees can solve those problems in different ways, but they don't need to have a full-time employee to do it. And so I think as the world moves more and more that way, we can become more flexible and be CEOs of one and control that, because even the big companies are going to realize, why do I have to pay? I think that I've mentioned this Asana survey before, that 27% of knowledge workers are 27% of the time of knowledge workers is actually spent on knowledge work.
Mhm.
And every corporate employee is a knowledge worker, right? So we're only spending 27% of our day doing the job we were hired to do. That's a lot of waste, right?
Mhm.
And if big companies are going to figure out, why do I want to pay the 73% extra? In small businesses, we can offer it now because they can cut through the red tape. And so another long-winded answer to say that I think the future of work is heading this way now pretty quickly. And so being out in front of this will give us those options and be kind of the leaders as we transition through this phase of it. So
Definitely. And it's such a win for companies as well, because like you said, they don't necessarily need to hire someone full time. But yeah, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can hire someone fractionally and still get your needs met and not have to, you know, overstretch your budget.
yeah, and still I think the big part where I think some small businesses and maybe even big businesses miss the fact is, well, when I've hired a company in the past to do my marketing, they didn't really get me. So what you're missing, there's a better way of, because that to me is a transaction, where like fractional, and we can get into the definition of fractional, it's different for folks, but to me, fractional is leadership of a role or a position within a company. And if I'm in a small business and we need CRM help, right, and nobody in that company knows how to do CRM, you can be a fractional leader of that CRM. It doesn't have to be C-suite. You don't have to do these things. It's just somebody that can provide leadership within that company for a specific need. And it just makes just way too much sense for companies to leverage this. And then you get to know that company, right? You're working on their behalf, not just a one of 25 or 50 customers you're working on that you can't provide that level of service. So I
Right.
think it's the other thing that people don't appreciate about the escapee world is you only need a few customers, right, at a time to make this work. We don't need tens and hundreds of these things. So it can be super personal.
Absolutely. And they might and they do, come back as repeat clients and customers, which is nice too. So it's not like you're necessarily always on the search for a new client.
Yeah, and referrals and all the good stuff.
Mhm.
All right, so I'm going to put you on the hot seat a little bit as, again, it's been relatively new. So what has been some of the biggest challenges that you've faced as you've gone solo, and did any of them surprise you?
I mean, I would say they all surprised me because, like,
Fair
when
enough.
I left, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Right.
So I would say the biggest challenges, which like I welcome into my life because I enjoy learning, have just been figuring out what I need to learn about. So, for example, networking. I never in my life had to network before like this. So that was the steep learning curve. Marketing, website design, all the things. And I look forward, this is a side note, but I look forward to the time where I can mentor other people through this process and kind of give them a to-do list or an order of operations because there's a lot of it like kind of fumbling around in the dark. But, it's been incredibly exciting. And when I look back at how much I've learned in just the last few months, it's exhilarating, I don't know how else to put it. So I would say the biggest challenges have also been the most rewarding experiences.
Yeah, it's awesome. I've heard a lot of folks also say it's not easy, which I don't think anybody's pretending it's easy, but it's hard, but it's your hard, right?
Mhm.
It's for you. You're not working for somebody else and, spending that time for you, or you are spending the time on you and what you want to work on versus, some other corporation's goals. So,
Absolutely.
um,
And when
yeah,
you
and I
have
love,
oh, sorry.
I've got,
Well, I was just going to say, when you have a community, this is what's been the most helpful for me is that I can talk about things like imposter syndrome or corporate identity versus your identity, all these things. And sure enough, there's usually a few other people who are like, yep, I'm experiencing that too. People with all sorts of incredible careers behind them who I would never think they have that experience too. So it's really nice to just feel like, okay, this is normal and there are ways to get through it. And sure enough, you do. So I think that support is super helpful.
yeah, agreed. Yeah, it's definitely an underappreciated. Don't do it alone for sure.
No, don't do it
Um,
alone.
did you find, oh shoot, I just had a question for you. All right, I'll come back to it because it was just more along the lines of getting started. Oh no, I was gonna say, I really like your idea of the to-do list, right? As I've talked and met with more and more folks, it's clear. No, but again, I'm finding no two paths are the same,
It's true.
right? And no two things you're doing. But it comes down again, it's super corny little thing that I've come up with is, the BAM. You got to believe in yourself, right? You got to have that confidence, take action. That's one of the hardest things for people after they do sort of kind of believe, take action, and just find a little bit of momentum. You get that first client or that first, even if it's not exactly what, it just builds on it versus, because I think when you're thinking you're sitting in corporate and I want to run my business, it just seems like this gap is so overwhelming at times. But at some point, you just don't care. I was at the point, I don't care if it's that far, I'm going anyway. But it's not that bad if you actually break it into, more bite-sized steps. I don't know. Curious if you've seen that so far, what you thought when you left, where you're at. It's probably a bigger gulp than you want it to be, but you can see the other side.
Absolutely. And I think, personally, I love mantras or affirmations or just, things you tell yourself. And one of them, I've heard you say it too, that like done is better than perfect, I think is one of the things. And so there's a few things I say to myself often, and that's one of them because, especially when it's your own work, you can sit back and like analyze it and rewrite it and redo it, for eternity. And so there is this point where it's like, all right, just gotta get it out there, get the ball rolling. And then also that point about, being comfortable in the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's so important too, because when you are, at least for me, I've never, like I said, had to really do a lot of networking. So now if I'm emailing somebody or all these things are a little bit uncomfortable and exciting. And so when I find myself coming up against some resistance, I just have these few sayings that I say to myself, or like, think about where you're going to be in a year, and that helps get me through.
Yeah, that's so good. And we should start in the community, the escapee affirmations, right?
Absolutely.
I'm 100% with you. Curious, and one of the things that I really struggled with initially when I went solo was the time management piece, right? I could always do client work well because it's prioritized. You knew what had to get done. You had deadlines. All of a sudden, you got this entire world in front of you where you own the to-do list and executing against it. Was that a challenge for you, or was that something you were comfortable with?
Well, I have a two-part answer. On one hand, it was like absolutely glorious just having freedom. And I started this habit of walking in the morning, wearing my weighted vest that I learned about from Michael Easter's Comfort Crisis book, going for a walk and listening to a podcast or an audiobook. And it's just changed my life. It's such a great way to start the day. I get super motivated. I get really encouraged by the material I'm ingesting. My blood's flowing and everything. So then I'll come home and just be like ready to go, So in that way, motivation hasn't been an issue. The piece that I find hard is that there's so much I want to do and I only have X amount of hours in the day. And the last time I was at this intersection of like building my own thing, I didn't have children yet, and now I do. And so I have to really end my workday. I can't plow through until 10 o'clock at night. So there's this element of just eagerness to get back to it. So time management, I would not say I struggle with that. If anything, it's really trying to understand what's the most important thing to focus on next.
Yeah, and so more prioritization then. Yeah, that's a good point. It's funny because my journey, I went from complete chaos, right? All these hours to just scrambling. And then I found a couple books, kind of like you. I had Time Rich and, Process is the Product. I got uber detailed on my time management, like down to the 15-minute slot. And that just didn't work for me. It did for a bit. But now I've kind of segmented my day, like early mornings. I still get up really early. I like the coffee. And for like the first couple of hours, that's really my good thinking, creative type of work. But then by mid-morning or like 9 o'clock, that's when I'll hit the walk or go to the gym, listen to the podcast, get the inspiration. And then that's good for the next 3 hours, gets me to lunch. And then afternoons tend to be more of the administrative type tasks.
Mm-hmm.
So that's working well. So I know I've got my 3 different slots to get work done, and then just figuring out how to prioritize what I'm doing at each of them. Now, no it's never perfect, client calls or, when we do some of the podcasts, I'll make sure that I time. But that's become a much better. And I know everybody's got a different system, but it took me a while to figure out what's the right system for me.
And I think that's just it. People do operate more effectively at different times of the day. And when you do have that freedom to put your efforts in when you have the most energy and brain power, you're going to be a lot more effective instead of having to adhere to someone else's schedule and requirements.
Yeah, it just doesn't work. And again, you touched on one of the benefits. At least you and I like the workouts, right? Being able to do that in the morning. There's other people like, I don't want to work out. That's not important to me. I'm like, well, just replace that hour or 90 minutes with something else that is important to you and that you couldn't do while you're sitting in a corporate job. So
absolutely.
Well, Adrienne, time is flying by. Is there anything we didn't touch on or any other words of advice you'd have for folks that are thinking about, or, I want to encourage people, everybody should explore it, even if it's not for you, educate yourself. But what are some tips and advice that you'd have for folks early on in their journey? No press.
Make friends, connect with people so you can have your support system and that camaraderie and fun at the same time. And yeah, I think give yourself some grace that it is a process of exploration. And there's a lot to be learned and a lot to discover along the way, which is exciting. And, all the other emotions that you feel. So, yeah, find your tribe and give yourself some grace.
Yeah, it was somebody in the community last week, maybe it's your vibe will find your tribe.
I love that.
Yeah, it's so good. And it goes back to being your authentic self, right? Be yourself, be what you want to talk about. I guarantee you there's others that want to learn and hear that are behind you where you are in that journey. So, all right, Adrienne. Well, we're going to, as I've told some recent guests, I'm going to continue to do Where Are They Now updates. So I know you're early in your journey, so maybe another 6 months we'll check back in with you and see how it's going, if you made any pivots or where you're at. But definitely appreciate you spending some time and sharing your journey so far with the audience. I just think it's so helpful. And I think what you're doing is super inspiring too. So continued success with that.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
And lastly, I'll put in the show notes, but what's the best way for people to connect with you if they want to learn more, network with you? Like I said, I'll put in the show notes. What's the best way?
So yeah, LinkedIn, Adrienne Farrell. And I do have a free 30-minute strategy session or connection call or whatever it's called. If people do want to connect about anything really, career, health and wellness, all that. And then my website is the same name.
Yeah,
so, and the InnovateHer Lab is a different website. It's InnovateHerLab.com.
Well, they actually got that URL is kind of cool too. So
yeah, I know. I was surprised.
Awesome. All right. Well, folks, go check her out. Like I said, we'll bring her back on here in a few months to do a little touch base. But thanks again for spending the time and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.